This story is called The President Sang Amazing Grace. Go to the first page. A young man came to a house of prayer. They did not ask what brought him there. He was not a friend, he was not kin, but they opened the door and let him in. And for an hour the stranger stayed. He sat with them and seemed to pray. But then the young man drew a gun and killed 9 people, old and young. In Charleston in the month of June, the mourners gathered in a room. Everybody see these? The president came to speak some words, and the cameras rolled, and the nation heard. But no words could say what must be said for all the living and the dead. So on that day and in that place, the president sang Amazing Grace. The president sang Amazing Grace. We argued where to lay the blame, on one man's hate or our nation's shame, some sickness of the mind or soul, and how the wounds might be made whole. But no words could say what must be said for all the living and the dead. So on that day and in that place, the president sang Amazing Grace. My president sang Amazing Grace.
That's a really sad song, huh? And a super sad story. And it's a true story. And you know what? When President Obama came to that community to share in their grief, he sang. And I don't think he sang because he was like, you know what? I'm going to show these people what a good singer I am. And he didn't do it because, I don't think, because he wanted to show the people, you know what? I'm a pretty religious guy, so I'm going to sing a religious song. Those weren't the reasons. He sang, I think, because singing is powerful. It's why we do so much of it here. Because singing together reminds us that we are not alone. We are never alone. Even if we're all by ourselves in a room with the lights off, we are not alone. Because we have love inside us. And that love will never, ever, ever let us go. Will never leave us alone. Yep. I'm not sure what was just shared, but it was something about going to bed.
When she gets in the bed and she turns out the light, she's scared in the dark.
Oh, you know, the dark can be scary.
And love is in the dark.
And love is there.
There.
All the time.
In your heart.
And I think because, not only because I love to sing and I love to have you sing with me, that's a thing that really lights up my whole world, but I believe that when we sing, we are reminded that we're not alone ever. And one of the reasons that we sing our children to their classes is because we want them to have our voices carrying them out, knowing they're not alone, knowing that we're here, even when we're in different places in the church. We're all here, and it's love that brings us together, and that is Amazing Grace. Let's sing our children to their classes and activities. For the past 2 Sundays, we have explored what it could mean to live undivided lives, individually and as a congregation. An undivided life is a life lived with integrity, where the walk and the talk are in alignment with our core values, the very essence of who we are. However, there is an aspect of integrity that we sometimes overlook unless we're talking about buildings, structural integrity. Now, I've watched probably more than my share of home renovation shows, and the lesson I've learned is that things are not always what they seem. A house may look great inside and out, but when you remove a wall, a facade, and go deeper, that's when you discover that termites or water or bad craftsmanship have compromised the structural integrity of the house. If you've seen the shows or had this happen in your own life, you know that the only way forward is to stop what you're doing and correct the problem. I remember a song from my early Sunday school days that kind of went with this idea of structural integrity, and it was based on a parable that Jesus told. If you know it, feel free to join in. The wise man built his house upon the rock. The wise man built his house upon the rock. The wise man built his house upon the rock, and the rains came tumbling down. The rains came down and the floods came up. The rains came down and the floods came up. The rains came down and the floods came up, and the house on the rock stood firm. I'm glad I'm not the only Sunday school scholar. Then we'd sing about the foolish man who built his house upon the sand, and that was great fun, because when those rains came down, the house was washed away. It was pretty dramatic. No structural integrity. Of course, since this is a parable, we can probably guess that Jesus wasn't talking about people building real houses. He was talking about the structural integrity of our lives, of building on something solid, something enduring, not tossed by the waves of the floodwaters of life's circumstances. Our lives need structural integrity. We also yearn to be part of something larger, an integral part of a greater purpose, a wider love. When we're willing to do the work on ourselves, to be grounded in our core values, we become strong threads to be woven into a larger tapestry of beloved community. Our strength, as tiny as it may be, is woven into others' strength to create a veritable breastplate of righteousness. Martin Luther King Jr. described that as an inescapable network of mutuality that ties us together in a single garment of destiny. Today I'm going to talk about Martin Luther King Jr. and the influence his life and words have had and continue to have on our cultural consciousness and our commitment to racial equality and social justice. Unlike many of the prophets who preceded him, King left his legacy in words, in papers and speeches and letters, where he forged the iron of his will and his determination to inspire all of us, white and of color, to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope, to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. Those last poetic phrases are from King's most well-known and beloved I Have a Dream speech, delivered in the shadow of the Lincoln Monument in D.C. on August 28, 1963. Did you know that Martin and his wife Coretta attended Unitarian churches while he was in graduate school in Boston? They were attracted to liberal religion and its emphasis on social justice in the here and now. Wouldn't it be awesome if we could claim Martin Luther King Jr. as a Unitarian Universalist. Can you hear the but coming? But, according to Coretta Scott King, although she and Martin gave serious thought to becoming Unitarian, given the times and the circumstances, Martin realized they could never create a mass movement for Black people if they were Unitarian. Those are not my words. Those are the words of Coretta Scott King, as paraphrased in an article in the November-December 2002 issue of UU World magazine. I think we should unpack that a bit. Okay, so let's get this straight. Martin Luther King Jr. and his wife Coretta were attracted to liberal religion, to Unitarianism, but given the times, given the circumstances, decided they could never create a mass movement for Black people if they were Unitarian. Even with our emphasis on social justice and a theology that strives to make a heaven here on earth, they felt the Unitarian Church was just not a good fit for their ministry of civil rights for people of color. So I think about the Unitarianism of the 1950s, when they would have been making their decision. It was before the merger of Unitarianism and Universalism, so we really need to just look at Unitarianism. At mid-century, our churches were predominantly white, middle and upper middle class, and had embraced the here and now philosophy of humanism. Not so very different from today. Although we could argue that at the time, Unitarians were still at least nominally Christian, and that really, Jesus was a humanist, some important piece of the Christian experience had been left behind. As we ponder that, let me ask you another question. Why was the 44th President of the United States not a Unitarian? Barack Obama's grandmother, Madeline Dunham, who raised him from the time he was 10, was a Unitarian, and I imagine he must have gone to church with her, at least occasionally. He certainly embodies the values and principles of this faith and did so during his presidency. And yet, when, as an adult, it came time to affiliate with a church, he followed in the King's footsteps and became a Baptist. Now, I can't speak for the Kings or President Obama as to what motivated their decisions, but having been a Baptist, I can speculate about what must have been a factor, consciously or unconsciously. We sang about it and heard about it in the Time for All Ages. Amazing grace. An awareness that life is a gift that exceeds our understanding, and that we have done nothing to deserve this gift. So it's kind of the difference between feeling incredibly blessed to be a child of God, to thinking that God is really lucky to have us awesome kids. Okay, that's the difference of grace. So you've heard probably the old joke that, and I say it's a joke, but it's really sort of a way to describe the theology of the Unitarians and Universalists at the merger, that the Unitarians the Universalists said that God was too good, too kind to ever condemn anyone. And the Unitarians said that they were too good for God to condemn. It's that same kind of feeling, the difference. And grace is more from that space of, I'm not the best slice of bread on the block. Don't use that metaphor ever. When President Obama sang Amazing Grace in the wake of the shootings in Charleston, it was not a show of religiosity. It was mutuality, shared grief, and shared hope. A shared understanding of what it means to be alive in the midst of unspeakable tragedy. He affirmed that there is a love holding us, holding all that we love, and that we can rest and trust in that love. When Martin Luther King Jr. famously said, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that," he was not describing a love that drives out hate by turning on fire hoses or separating families and putting people in cages. Love drives out hate the way the rising sun dispels the darkness, by filling the world with light. Martin Luther King Jr. was deeply influenced by the actions and writings of a man half a world away, Mohandas Gandhi, called Mahatma, or Great Soul. Gandhi, an educated man, a lawyer, and a practicing Hindu, embraced and taught the path of nonviolent civil disobedience. Gandhi had a tremendous impact on India's eventual independence from Great Britain and spread that influence to South Africa as well. When asked to speak before a crowd to share his message, Gandhi is famously quoted as saying, "My life is my message." Although Gandhi set aside his social standing by dressing and living as one of India's poorest, he was able to put that social standing and living and education that it provided to work on behalf of Indians of all castes and classes. His life really was his message, and he often put his own health at risk as he undertook long fasts to apply political pressure and to encourage those in power to mobilize and act. Gandhi was assassinated on January 30th, 1948, by a Hindu national who disagreed with Gandhi's efforts to unravel tensions and to unite the three major religious groups of Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs, who were at war on India's border with Pakistan. It was just 9 months after Gandhi's death that Martin Luther King began studying Gandhi's writings on nonviolent civil disobedience. Gandhi was killed for trying to bring equality to the people of India, and by his reputation and influence to the whole world. Both Gandhi and Martin Luther King tried to bring light to darkness, to crowd out hate with a growing love, because darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. The temptation on these landmark Sundays, when we honor someone who has made a profound difference in the world, is to gaze lovingly back at the impact that they had and to take inspiration from that backward glance. But like the Roman god Janus, who is depicted with two faces, one gazing back and one looking forward, we must use the lessons of the past to inform our future. If all we get from this service is renewed admiration for Martin Luther King and a few trivia tidbits to add to our collection of little-known facts, well, then we've missed the mark entirely. And missing the mark, at least in the original Greek, is a sin. Yes, the word in Greek that we translate as sin literally means missing the mark, as in archery. You try to hit the bullseye and you miss. It seems like a lot of folks concentrate on that missing the mark piece, but I am much more interested in the fact that we try to hit the bullseye. We try. We don't just shoot arrows. We try, and we miss. And so we just need to adjust our aim or factor in environmental conditions to improve our chances. Maybe that is a useful lesson for us as liberal religionists, as Unitarian Universalists. So let's go back for a moment to my question of why our 44th president was not a Unitarian, and why Martin Luther King Jr. and his wife Coretta, although aligned with Unitarian values, chose another faith tradition from which to launch a mass movement for Black people. Let's approach this as having missed the mark. Not them, by the way, but of Unitarianism having missed the mark. and consider how we might adjust our aim or factor in environmental conditions to improve our chances of a bullseye. So as I said, Unitarian Universalism is still predominantly white, still mostly middle to upper middle class, still generally educated, and we still struggle with answering why we have such a hard time attracting and keeping a more multicultural presence in our congregations. Maybe, I don't know, maybe we can only attract a certain audience. Not so fast. Let me tell you a story. This is the story of a UU congregation in Oklahoma, Tulsa, to be precise, the land of Oral Roberts University, deeply rooted in the Bible Belt. This congregation, founded in 1921, has always been active in social justice and has been a voice for liberal values over the decades. I mean, truly, they have been out in front in their community since the beginning. Something especially interesting happened in 2008 when a Black Pentecostal congregation rented space from the church for their Sunday afternoon services. This congregation, the Pentecostal one, known as New Dimensions, was under the leadership of their minister, Carlton Pearson, ordained in the Church of God in Christ Pentecostal tradition. Carlton had come under the scrutiny of his faith tradition by his growing conviction that all souls, believers or not, would ultimately be reconciled to God, to the good. And although we call that universalism, the Pentecostals called that heresy. So, after much soul-searching and in deep conversation with Reverend Marlon Lavenhar, the senior minister of All Souls, Carlton Pearson dissolved New Dimensions at the end of the summer, and he invited his congregation to become members of All Souls and to enroll their children in the religious education program. Of course, some folks did not agree with the alliance, but a good many did, and they joined All Souls, and they brought their lively worship style to the Sunday afternoon service. All Souls Unitarian is now one of the largest Unitarian Universalist congregations in the world, with a little over 2,000 members and just under 900 in worship each weekend. I had to stop because it makes my heart palpitate a little bit. They made room for this Black congregation, at first with rental space, and then their hearts, and now sitting side by side in worship that I can guarantee does not look or sound like ours. And I think, and I'm projecting, I've not called the church to ask, but I think that perhaps the biggest challenge and change that the Unitarians had to make was to let God back in the building. It is, of course, the God of each individual's own experience, their own defining, but God and grace were invited to come in and stay. And lives are being transformed. Was that an easy transition? No. Did people leave? Undoubtedly. That's what freedom means, staying or leaving as your heart dictates. Both congregations believed that they could be better together, that their separate threads would weave a tapestry that could not be rivaled. They imagined something new and used the power and energy of that imagination and that trust in the love that holds us all to create a new way of being in the world. Last week, I challenged us to think creatively about how we can be relevant and transformative as a presence in the community, particularly how we might grow into our identity as a green sanctuary. So I had us imagine if we were that kind of church, that kind of church that brought in goats to eat the invasive plant life that we need to get rid of, and we want a green alternative. Imagine that we're just, that kind of church that not only does that, but invites the community to come in and learn about these kind of green technologies, how to maybe eat different foods, and to open hearts and minds to new ways of doing things. And I know you left Sunday and you were like, oh, that Michelle, she's so cute. But, if we don't imagine it, if we don't let that possibility into our hearts, we'll never know. The starting place is the imagination. We can imagine that a new world is possible. The Jewish Puerto Rican poet Aurora Levins Morales says this: "The stories we tell about our lives shape what we are able to imagine, and what we can imagine determines what we can do. My job is to change the stories we tell and help us imagine a world where greed has no power, the earth is cherished, and all people get to live safe and satisfying lives. Because once we truly imagine it, the pull to create it becomes irresistible." As we shift our gaze from looking back to appreciate the life and work of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we take in what we have learned and we turn to look to the future, to imagine how another world is possible. I close with Aurora Levins Morales' poem, Ve'ahavta, which is Hebrew for, "and you shall love." May we be inspired, may we exercise our imagination, and may we rest in the love that holds us all. Ve'ahavta. Say these words when you lie down and when you rise up, when you go out and when you return, in times of mourning and in times of joy. Inscribe them on your doorposts, embroider them on your garments, tattoo them on your shoulders, teach them to your children, your neighbors, your enemies, recite them in your sleep. Here in the cruel shadow of empire, another world is possible. Thus spoke the prophet Rock Dalton. Altogether they have more death than we, but altogether we have more life than they. There is more bloody death in their hands than we could ever wield unless we lay down our souls to become them, and then we will lose everything. So instead, imagine winning. This is your sacred task. This is your power. Imagine every detail of winning, the exact smell of the summer streets in which no one has been shot. The muscles you have never unclenched from worry gone soft as newborn skin. The sparkling taste of food when we know that no one on earth is hungry, that the beggars are fed, that the old man under the bridge and the woman wrapping herself in thin sheets in the back seat of a car, and the children who suck on stones, nest under a flock of roofs that keep multiplying their shelter. Lean with all your being towards that day when the poor of the world shake down a rain of good fortune out of the heavy clouds and justice rolls down like waters. Defend the world in which we win as if it were your child. It is your child. Defend it as if it were your lover. It is your lover. When you inhale and when you exhale, breathe the possibility of another world into the 37.2 trillion cells of your body until it shines with hope. Then imagine more. Imagine rape is unimaginable. Imagine war is a scarcely credible rumor. That the crimes of our age, the grotesque inhumanities of greed, the sheer and astounding shamelessness of it, the vast fortunes made by stealing lives, the horrible normalcy it came to have, is unimaginable to our heirs, the generations of the free. Don't waver. Don't let despair sink its sharp teeth into the throat with which you sing. Escalate your dreams, make them burn so fiercely that you can follow them down any dark alleyway of history and not lose your way. Make them burn clear as a starry drinking gourd over the grim fog of exhaustion, and keep walking. Hold hands. Share water. Keep imagining, so that we and the children of our children's children may live.